Hey everyone, good evening, and welcome to a journey unlike any other. Tonight, we're stepping behind the golden masks and colossal tombs of ancient Egypt, uncovering the secret, fascinating, and sometimes utterly disturbing lives of the pharaohs. If you're searching for a calm, thought-provoking story to gently carry you into dreamland, or even just to lose yourself in the mysteries of history, then you've come to exactly the right place. And now, if my history-based storytelling can give your mind a little space tonight, please make sure to subscribe, give a like, and drop a comment telling me which corner of the world you're tuning in from. Honestly, it makes me so happy to see how far my stories reach. So dim the lights in your room, get cozy, maybe even feel the soft hum of a fan in the background, and let yourself drift into a world where kings were gods, and gods walked among the living, where a single day could be more dangerous than anywhere else on Earth. Are you ready? Because tonight, we're going to uncover the hidden power, obsession, and dark secrets of Egypt's most infamous rulers. And trust me, you won't believe some of what we'll find. Tonight, we are going to dive into a world that most of us can only imagine through the shimmering gold of a museum exhibit or the towering silhouettes of pyramids against the desert sky. But behind all that grandeur, the pharaohs of ancient Egypt lived lives steeped in power, mystery, and an almost unimaginable sense of divinity. These rulers weren't just kings, they were gods on earth, and their belief in their own divine status shaped every corner of Egyptian civilization, from politics to religion, and from daily life to the afterlife. Imagine living in a world where your word is law, not just because you are powerful, but because people genuinely believe you are a deity. From the moment a pharaoh ascended the throne, their life was framed by rituals, ceremonies, and expectations that marked them as more than human. They were intermediaries between the gods and the people, tasked with maintaining Ma'at, the divine balance of order, justice, and cosmic harmony. Their every action was meant to reflect the will of the gods, and failing in any of these duties could be seen as catastrophic, not only for them, but for the entire kingdom. Pharaohs were depicted everywhere in Egyptian art as larger than life, often shown in statues and reliefs with divine symbols, the crook and flail representing kingship and power, the false beard, a mark of divine authority, and the Nemes headdress, instantly recognizable as a sign of their godly status. Even in their daily attire, gold and fine linens weren't just luxuries, they were markers of their elevated place in the universe. Their clothing, their jewelry, and even the way they walked through palace corridors were loaded with symbolic meaning. The belief in their divinity extended beyond symbolism. Pharaohs were often seen as the earthly embodiments of Horus, the falcon-headed god of the sky. From the moment of birth, a pharaoh's life was intertwined with the gods. Their coronation wasn't just a political ceremony, it was a sacred ritual that reaffirmed their divine role. Priests would perform complex rites, invoking the gods, and the pharaoh would take part in offerings and prayers that symbolized the harmony between the mortal and divine. In many ways, the throne itself was not seen as a position of mere power, but as a sacred trust handed down from the heavens. This divine status affected not just their public life, but their private life as well. Every decision they made, from laws to battles, carried the weight of religious significance. If a pharaoh led troops into war, it was believed the gods themselves guided their hand. If a harvest failed, it could be interpreted as a sign that the ruler had lost favor with the divine order. Even their personal relationships and marriages were infused with a sense of sacred duty, aligning dynastic decisions with divine will
to ensure the prosperity and stability of Egypt. Interestingly, this belief in godhood also shaped the pharaoh's perception of mortality. Many saw themselves as eternal beings. Death was not the end, but a transition into an even more significant divine role in the afterlife. The elaborate tombs, the careful mummification processes, and the treasures buried alongside them were all designed to ensure that the pharaoh could continue their godlike existence beyond the mortal realm. Their life, death, and afterlife were inseparable elements of the same divine story. Being a pharaoh also meant that every citizen was encouraged, or compelled, to participate in acknowledging your divinity. Public ceremonies, festivals, and offerings reinforced the ruler's godhood. Temples were constructed not only for the gods themselves, but also to honor the living pharaoh as an earthly manifestation of divinity. This constant affirmation ensured that their presence, even in absence, dominated the political, social, and spiritual landscape of Egypt. Yet, with such immense power came immense pressure. A pharaoh's mistakes were not seen merely as political blunders. They could be considered cosmic disruptions. This expectation demanded perfection in judgment, action, and presentation. And because humans are inherently flawed, these pressures often created a life of isolation, paranoia, and obsessive attention to every detail of governance, personal behavior, and religious performance. It was not uncommon for pharaohs to become intensely involved in even the smallest rituals, believing that neglect could imperil both themselves and the entire kingdom. The divine image of the pharaoh also extended to the arts and culture. Artists, scribes, and craftsmen worked under strict guidelines to depict their ruler in ways that emphasized godliness, majesty, and permanence. Hieroglyphs were not just writing, they were sacred communication tools that reinforced the pharaoh's divine mandate. Monuments, statues, and temple reliefs immortalized their visage, often exaggerating features or scaling them larger than life to convey power that transcended humanity. Even ordinary citizens were encouraged to see the pharaoh as more than human. Stories, myths, and official records all reinforced the idea that the ruler was chosen by the gods, their very existence a guarantee of Egypt's stability. This divinity, however, was not purely symbolic. Some pharaohs truly embraced the role with zeal, establishing rituals and laws that mirrored their divine identity. Others, perhaps aware of the immense expectations, used the image of godhood strategically to command loyalty, instill fear, and maintain power over a complex and often fractious society. Whether through genuine belief or calculated politics, or likely a mix of both, every pharaoh carefully cultivated their divine persona, because in ancient Egypt, to be king was to be God. So as we begin to explore the lives of these rulers, remember that when we speak of their power, their wealth, or their influence, we're talking more than political authority. We're talking about beings who walked among humans while claiming the mandate of heaven itself. Their every act, no matter how trivial it may seem, was imbued with cosmic significance, setting the stage for a life that was, in its way, both extraordinary and deeply isolating. By understanding the divine status of pharaohs, we begin to see the lens through which they viewed the world. Every law, every ritual, every battle, and every architectural marvel was part of a plan to reflect their sacred role. And as we move into the next layers of their lives, the intrigue, the obsessions, the secrets, we'll see how being a god on earth was as terrifying as it was magnificent.
Now that we've glimpsed the divine status of the pharaohs, It's time to step into their daily lives. And trust me, it was nothing short of extraordinary. Living as a pharaoh wasn't just about ruling a kingdom. It was about inhabiting a world of unimaginable luxury, ritual, and sensory experience. Imagine waking up in a palace that stretched farther than the eye could see. Walls painted in vibrant colors, floors polished until they reflected the sun, ceilings adorned with golden symbols of gods and cosmic balance. The scent of incense hung in the air constantly, a subtle reminder that divinity, order, and power were intertwined with every breath. A typical day began early, though the concept of early for a pharaoh might not match our modern schedules. Before the sun had fully risen over the Nile, servants were already preparing elaborate baths. Water scented with exotic oils and petals from distant lands filled golden tubs large enough to fit several attendants. Aromatic oils glided over the pharaoh's skin. This was not just hygiene, this was ritual. The pharaoh's body itself was sacred. Every act of grooming reinforced that sanctity. Dressing was another elaborate affair. The pharaoh's clothing was never ordinary. Fine linen, often bleached to dazzling whiteness, cut and folded with precision, embroidered with gold threads, adorned with precious gems. Sandals, if worn indoors, were lavish. Jewelry everywhere. Collars of lapis lazuli, bracelets of gold, rings set with carnelian and turquoise. Each item symbolized status and cosmic connection. Even the simplest action like walking through a corridor became an expression of divine majesty. Meals were ceremonial as well as indulgent. Breakfast, or whatever meal a pharaoh might take, consisted of exotic fruits, fresh fish from the Nile, honey-sweetened breads, and meats prepared with aromatic herbs. Drinks included wines, honeyed beverages, and carefully purified water. Every meal was blessed by priests, reinforcing the sacred nature of consumption. Eating was never merely a practical act, it was a ritual, a symbolic reminder of divine harmony. Responsibilities filtered through this luxury. Audiences with nobles and advisors took place in grand halls. Every gesture and word carefully choreographed to reflect wisdom, power, and divine authority. Thrones elevated on platforms, carved with stories of gods, victories, and cosmic balance. Meetings weren't casual, they were performances. The pharaoh's presence alone commanded obedience. Every interaction infused with symbolism, ritual, and political meaning. Entertainment reflected the wealth and sophistication of the court. Music filled the halls. Harps, flutes, and drums played by skilled musicians, creating a background of harmony and elegance. Dancers performed intricate routines representing the balance between humans and gods. Exotic animals, lions, cheetahs, and monkeys were kept as companions and symbols of power. Hunting expeditions were both sport and demonstration of skill, courage, and dominion over nature. Even leisure was ritualized. Games, athletic contests, and board games like Senate were not merely pastimes. They symbolized journeys through life, death, and the divine order. Playing these games became a meditation on duty, cosmic balance, and the pharaoh's role in maintaining Ma'at. The palace was a hive of activity. Hundreds of attendants, advisors, guards, and priests moved constantly, ensuring every aspect of the pharaoh's life was perfect. Every meal, every garment, every schedule, even the temperature in a room was meticulously controlled to maintain comfort and divine order. The palace functioned simultaneously as a home, a temple, and a stage for power and ritual. Evenings were equally rich with feasts, music, poetry, and storytelling. Banquets displayed wealth, forged alliances, and reinforced authority.
Exotic dishes and rare spices created spectacle, yet ritual remained central. Each feast reaffirmed the pharaoh's elevated status, reminding all present of the sacred nature of their ruler. Sleep was treated with care, beds lavish, elevated, draped with fine linens. Attendants ensured comfort with cushions and precise temperature control. Dreams considered significant, often interpreted as divine messages or guidance. Rest, preparation for the next day of sacred duty, reinforcing the continuity of divine rule. Life as a pharaoh was structured to an extreme degree. Every pleasure, every luxury, every comfort infused with meaning. Nothing merely for indulgence, it served the dual purpose of asserting authority and maintaining cosmic harmony. Yet beneath the lavish surface, the pressures were constant. Mistakes were not trivial. They could be interpreted as disruptions to cosmic order. Every act, from minor gestures to monumental decisions, reflected the sacred role of the pharaoh. Beyond personal comfort, the pharaoh's life also shaped the kingdom's culture and administration. Arts, architecture, and literature developed under royal supervision. Every construction, every relief, every hymn reinforced the ruler's divine identity. Artists and scribes worked to immortalize the pharaoh, exaggerating features or scale to convey a majesty beyond human reach. Even the common people were drawn into this world. Citizens constantly reminded of the pharaoh's status through rituals, festivals, and public appearances. Daily life, in subtle ways, reinforced the idea that the ruler was more than human, and that obedience, respect, and participation in state rituals were not optional, they were sacred duties. Interestingly, the pharaoh's life of luxury intertwined with intense isolation. Despite constant activity of attendants and advisors, very few people could truly approach the ruler as an equal. Friends and confidants were rare, trust difficult. The pressures of maintaining perfection in every action, appearance, and ceremony created a unique blend of opulence and solitude. To be a pharaoh was to live at the intersection of divine duty and human desire. Every bath, every meal, every musical performance, and every sporting event served both personal pleasure and sacred responsibility. Their life was extraordinary, but never free from expectation, scrutiny, or ritual. Understanding the opulent daily life of a pharaoh allows us to see both the beauty and the burden of divine kingship. Their world shimmering gold, exotic scents, ceremonial precision. Yet at every moment, also a life of careful calculation, ritual, and unwavering attention to every detail. The luxury imagined inseparable from responsibility, grandeur intertwined with isolation, pressure, and the weight of divine expectation. Every gesture mattered, every moment loaded with meaning, every day a performance of perfection. Stepping into the daily life of a pharaoh, we begin to understand the extraordinary demands of being both a god and a human ruler, a life magnificent, exhausting, and utterly fascinating.
Now that we've explored the divine status of the pharaohs and the opulent luxury of their daily lives, it's time to step into a world of secrecy, strategy, and subtle power, the royal harem. Often imagined as a space of exotic luxury and beauty, the harem in ancient Egypt was far more than that. It was a political hub, a center of influence, and a microcosm of power. Every gesture, every look, and every whisper within its walls could carry consequences that rippled across the entire kingdom. The harem was structured with precision. At the top were the pharaoh's principal wives, often daughters of nobles or foreign royalty. Their marriages were rarely based on love. They were instruments of political alliance, consolidating power and loyalty. Every favor, every gesture, and every word of these women could shift the balance of influence within the palace. It was a delicate game, one that required intelligence, tact, and foresight. The palace quarters for the harem were lavish, rooms painted in rich colors, adorned with gold accents and filled with the scent of incense and exotic oils. Attendants moved tirelessly, ensuring that every aspect of comfort, appearance, and ritual was maintained. Baths, scented with petals and essential oils, were more than hygiene, they were ceremonial. Dressing was equally meticulous. Fine linens, embroidered with gold and adorned with precious stones, were worn with exacting care. Every accessory, from collars of lapis lazuli to rings of carnelian and turquoise, carried symbolic meaning. Walking through these corridors was not just movement, it was a statement of status, influence, and divine favor. The harem was also a stage for ambition. Rivalries existed, often hidden beneath polite smiles and careful conversation. Women competed for attention, favor, and influence, and their actions could determine the future of their children. A single gesture, a word spoken at the wrong time, could elevate or diminish status within the court. Political acumen was essential, as alliances shifted constantly, and loyalty was never guaranteed. Children in the harem was central to these dynamics. Sons and daughters were not only heirs, but instruments of strategy. Mothers guided their children's education, alliances, and early introductions to courtly life, ensuring they were positioned for future power. Rivalries between siblings were common, as the line of succession was rarely straightforward. Factions formed around favored heirs, and each member of the harem had a role in influencing or protecting the pharaoh's next generation. The pharaoh's presence was the pivot of all harem politics. Favor, attention, or neglect from him could change the fortunes of individuals and families alike. The women understood this dynamic fully. Some were trusted advisors, quietly influencing political and diplomatic decisions. Others focused on securing their children's positions, maneuvering through subtle strategies and discreet interventions. The harem was simultaneously a domestic space and a political battlefield. Daily life in the harem was luxurious and highly ritualized. Music, dance, and poetry were integral to the space, serving both entertainment and ceremonial purposes. Performances often represented divine harmony, the balance of human and cosmic order. Even leisure carried significance. Board games, storytelling, and rituals reinforced cultural traditions and highlighted the sacred role of the pharaoh. Foreign princesses added another layer of complexity. Brought into the palace through alliances and diplomacy, they carried their own traditions, knowledge, and influence. Their presence introduced new customs, fashion, and sometimes subtle political considerations. The pharaoh's interactions with them were never solely personal. They were strategic, symbolic, and often critical to maintaining political stability. Despite the luxury and influence, the harem could be isolating. Trust was scarce, and alliances were fluid. The women navigated a complex social landscape, balancing ambition with caution, power with discretion. Every decision, every conversation, every subtle act had potential consequences for themselves and their children. Survival required intelligence, patience, and a keen understanding of human behavior. The harem also mirrored the pharaoh's obsession with order, ritual, and divinity. Religious observances, ceremonial duties, and sacred rituals were woven into daily life. Every action within the harem, from bathing to dressing, from meals to leisure, reinforced the connection between the pharaoh, the court, and the gods. Women were participants in these rituals, helping maintain spiritual and cultural continuity. Their roles extended beyond personal influence. They were guardians of tradition and intermediaries between divine authority and daily life. Historians and archaeologists
have uncovered glimpses of this intricate world through tomb paintings, inscriptions, and letters. They reveal a society where strategy, diplomacy, and personal ambition were inseparable from domestic life. Some women used their influence to shape state policy or guide the pharaoh's decisions. Others maneuvered discreetly, protecting their children, securing alliances, or consolidating power. Each action, however subtle, could have far-reaching consequences for the kingdom. The harem was also a reflection of the pharaoh's personal desires and strategic vision. Some rulers took pleasure in the beauty and luxury, cultivating a space that reflected their divine image. Others treated it as a political instrument, rewarding loyalty, punishing rivals, and controlling succession. Here, personal preference and political necessity intertwine seamlessly, creating a space where luxury, influence, and subtle maneuvering coexisted. Life in the harem was therefore a delicate balance. It was a space of indulgence, strategy, and ritual, yet filled with pressure, vigilance, and the constant need for discretion. Every smile, every favor, every word was calculated, each intended to preserve or enhance influence. In this world of human emotion, love, jealousy, ambition, and loyalty played out in quiet but powerful ways, shaping not only the lives of those within the palace, but the future of Egypt itself. Understanding the royal harem offers profound insight into the pharaoh's world. It reveals the invisible forces that sustained power, influenced decisions, and determined succession. The women of the harem were far more than companions or consorts. They were strategists, guardians, and intermediaries in a highly complex society. Their presence, influence, and actions had a direct impact on the stability, governance, and legacy of Egypt's most powerful rulers. By stepping into this world, we see a palace alive with intrigue, intelligence, and subtle power. The royal harem was a microcosm of Egypt itself, a place where luxury, influence, ambition, and ritual intersected in a space that shaped history as much as it reflected divine authority. It was a world where the most private aspects of life were inseparable from politics, strategy, and cosmic order.
As we move deeper into the lives of the pharaohs, we step beyond the glittering halls and lavish chambers into a world far less visible, but infinitely more dangerous. This is the world of court intrigue and political conspiracies, where whispered words and subtle gestures could determine the fate of an empire, and where the line between loyalty and betrayal was razor thin. Behind every grand ceremony, behind every monumental decision, there existed a shadow network of influence, ambition, and quiet maneuvering that shaped the history of Egypt. The palace was a maze of hidden agendas. Advisors, ministers, generals, and priests all navigated its labyrinthine corridors, each seeking favor, power, and advantage. Every conversation could be a test. Every glance could carry a hidden message. In a place where divine authority met human ambition, even the most minor interaction held the potential to change the balance of power. Ambition thrived quietly, as those who plotted carefully could gain immense influence, or disappear completely if miscalculation struck. Family members were seldom exempt from intrigue. Siblings, children, and in-laws often engaged in subtle competitions for influence. A brother's smile might hide a challenge. A sister's praise might mask a warning. Succession was never straightforward. In a palace where dynasties depended on securing heirs, even the closest relatives could become rivals. Secret alliances formed around potential heirs, while whispered warnings in hidden council determined who would rise and who would fade into obscurity. The personal was deeply political. Advisors wielded influence with both subtlety and skill. They shaped decisions, guided opinions, and sometimes manipulated information to consolidate their power. Some were loyal, some opportunistic, and others dangerously ambitious.
Politics in the palace was rarely about open confrontation. It was about nuance, about shaping perception, and about understanding human nature better than anyone else. A carefully timed suggestion could elevate an ally or undermine a rival, and every decision carried enormous consequences for those involved. Priests added yet another layer to this intricate web. Religious leaders were not only interpreters of the god's will, they were shapers of politics. Their counsel could affirm the pharaoh's divine legitimacy or subtly question it. Temples were not simply places of worship, they were centers of influence. The performance of sacred rituals, the interpretation of omens, and the presentation of divine guidance were all tools that could shift the power dynamics within the court. A priest's favor was coveted. Their disapproval could be dangerous. Every decision the pharaoh made was weighed against this backdrop of intrigue. Military campaigns, legislative decrees, and appointments were not only practical actions, they were public statements. Each move sent messages through the corridors of power, subtly signaling priorities, allegiances, and favor. A misstep could spark hidden resentment or provoke clandestine opposition. The stakes were immense, because in a world where divine authority intersected with human ambition, failure could be catastrophic. Even lower-ranking officials were integral to the palace's political ecosystem. Governors, diplomats, and military leaders communicated secretly with factions in the capital, reinforcing influence or subtly undermining rivals. Bribes, favors, and threats became common tools for navigating this invisible battlefield. Power was not static. It flowed like water, shifting according to alliances, strategies, and perception. Understanding and manipulating this flow was essential to survival and influence. Succession disputes were among the most dangerous games in the palace. Heirs were often sons of different wives, each supported by their mother's faction. Rivalries could become violent. Court advisors and ministers aligned with candidates, negotiating secretly, plotting subtly, and sometimes acting decisively when opportunity arose. The throne, though divinely sanctioned, was also fragile. Every whisper, every favor, and every subtle act could alter the future of Egypt itself. Assassinations, while rare, were a constant shadow over palace life. Plots could form in silence, and a single act of betrayal could rewrite history. Loyal guards and trusted ministers worked tirelessly to detect threats, while the pharaoh remained aware that even a hint of disloyalty could have lethal consequences. Paranoia was not merely a trait, it was a survival strategy woven into every interaction and every decision. Marriages within the palace were also deeply political. The choice of a wife, consort, or concubine could create new factions or consolidate existing ones. Children became instruments of influence. Foreign alliances introduced new variables, requiring constant attention and subtle diplomacy. The harem was not separate from politics, it was central to it. Each alliance, each birth, and each relationship had strategic implications that rippled through the corridors of power. Some pharaohs were masters of intrigue. They understood how to balance competing factions, how to manipulate perception, and how to maintain authority in a constantly shifting landscape. Others faltered, trusting the wrong person, misreading subtle signals, or failing to anticipate ambition. In these moments, divine authority met human cunning, and the palace became a crucible where trust, ambition, and divine authority constantly collided. Historical records, tomb inscriptions, and letters reveal the depth of this hidden world. Alliances, secret negotiations, and clandestine agreements were carefully documented or intentionally hidden. Some conspiracies succeeded in secrecy, shaping succession and policy without leaving visible traces. Others were discovered and punished, leaving dramatic legacies that influenced dynastic stability and the pharaoh's authority. These stories reveal the intensely human dynamics behind divine rule. Despite the danger, palace life demanded ceremony, elegance, and display. Halls that witnessed secret plotting were also filled with music, dance, and celebration. Banquets, public rituals, and festivals reinforced authority, projecting order and divine favor even while hidden maneuvering continued beneath the surface. The pharaoh's image had to remain impeccable, masking the tension, rivalry, and quiet battles that defined the court. Court intrigue extended beyond the walls of the palace. Provincial governors, military generals, and foreign envoys interacted in complex networks, creating a web of influence that stretched across the empire. Alliances formed and dissolved based on the pharaoh's decisions, rumors, and calculated interventions. Loyalty was conditional, ambition constant, and strategy an invisible but essential art form. Understanding court intrigue gives insight into the fragility behind the grandeur of Egypt. Temples, monuments, and palaces were symbols of divine authority, but they were also instruments of control, shaping perception and reinforcing hierarchy. The pharaoh's authority, though absolute, depended on constant vigilance, clever strategy, and subtle manipulation. Power was not simply given, it was maintained, defended, and negotiated every day. The palace was simultaneously a home, a stage, and a battlefield. Every interaction, every gesture, every ceremonial act was part of a performance designed to sustain order, reinforce authority, and navigate hidden tensions. In this world, brilliance, courage, and shrewd judgment were essential. The throne was more than a seat of power. It was a crucible in which trust, ambition, and divine authority constantly collided. The stories of court intrigue remind us that behind every monument, every temple, and every sacred ritual, there was a human story of strategy, ambition, and survival. These invisible battles shaped the destiny of Egypt, revealing that the lives of pharaohs were defined not only by their divine status, but also by the intricate and dangerous human dynamics around them. In understanding this world, we see power not as static force, but as a living, breathing struggle, requiring cunning, intelligence, and unceasing vigilance.
Sibling rivalries and succession battles. As we continue to walk through the shadowed corridors of the pharaoh's palace, one truth becomes impossible to ignore: that behind all the gold and divine glory, the royal family was often at war with itself. Sibling rivalries and succession battles weren't just family quarrels. They were struggles that could shape the fate of the entire kingdom, deciding who would rule, who would fall, and who might not live to see another sunrise. In ancient Egypt, blood was both a bond and a weapon. Every royal birth carried meaning. A prince wasn't simply a child, he was a possible king, a vessel of divine power. A princess wasn't only a daughter, she was a piece on the political chessboard, destined for marriage alliances that could strengthen or fracture the throne. From their first breath, royal children were drawn into a world where affection and ambition lived side by side. Even in the cradle, rivalries began to bloom. Different mothers, different factions, and different hopes all fought silently beneath the calm surface of palace life. One mother's smile might hide a plan. One advisor's whisper might shift the future. Power in Egypt didn't wait for adulthood. It began in the nursery. Education was never just about learning. Royal tutors and priests weren't teaching children only how to read or worship the gods. They were teaching them how to survive. A prince learned early to study faces, to sense danger in a tone of voice, to understand when flattery was fake and when silence was safer than truth. Even playtime had politics. A careless word, a small victory, or a favored gift could become fuel for future tension. And as the children grew, those quiet rivalries turned into dangerous competitions. A brother could sabotage another's reputation with a rumor. A sister might act as an ally one day and a rival the next. In the marble halls of the palace, trust was as fragile as papyrus, and loyalty shifted like desert sand. The moment of succession was the ultimate test and the most dangerous. In theory, the eldest son should inherit the throne, but reality was far more complicated. Ministers, generals, and priests could decide which heir they preferred. A child born to a powerful consort could rise above the son of a queen. Even a rumor of divine favor could change everything. The crown was not given, it was taken, negotiated, and sometimes stolen in the night. When those rivalries erupted, the palace turned into a battlefield. History tells of brothers exiled, imprisoned, or quietly eliminated when they threatened the throne. Alliances formed in secret chambers, while spies carried messages between wings of the palace. One misinterpreted glance, one careless word, and blood could be spilled. In a world where even gods were feared, nothing was more dangerous than family ambition. Behind every child there was a mother, and she was often the quiet general in these wars. Some mothers were gentle protectors, trying to balance ambition with peace. Others were fierce strategists, weaving networks of loyalty and influence, ensuring that their son or daughter would rise. They hosted gatherings, whispered to priests, and made enemies disappear with a smile. The royal court was not just ruled by pharaohs, it was shaped by the women behind them. Sisters, too, were far from powerless. They played the long game, marrying into other dynasties, forging alliances, or using charm and diplomacy to shift the balance of power. A sister's loyalty could lift a brother to the throne, or destroy him. Her words, her marriage, even her silence could decide who ruled Egypt's golden lands. And the royal harem and court life only deepened the intrigue. Every gesture from the pharaoh, a glance, a gift, a word was interpreted for meaning. Who did he favor? Which child did he trust? Advisors watched closely, factions whispered. Even the smallest movement, a shared meal, a public ceremony, could send ripples through the palace, altering alliances overnight. And beyond the palace walls, the outside world was watching. Foreign kingdoms sought to influence Egypt's royal succession. Through marriages, gifts, and promises, they supported one prince or another, hoping to shape Egypt's future from afar. A royal rivalry could become a diplomatic weapon, a game played across borders and deserts. Sometimes these rivalries turned into open war. Armies loyal to different heirs clashed in the very land they hoped to rule. Provinces took sides. The Nile itself, silent and ancient, became the witness to civil strife. Even when bloodshed was avoided, the tension never vanished. The palace remained a place of smiles and secrets, where every breath had weight, and every word could change history. Religion added another layer. The priests, holding immense influence, could legitimize or destroy a claim to the throne with a single proclamation. A chosen heir might be declared favored by the gods, and suddenly divine will became political reality. Rituals, omens, and prophecies became the language of power, and belief itself was turned into a weapon. The effects of these rivalries rippled far beyond the palace gates. A contested throne meant chaos across the land. Nobles hesitated, soldiers wavered, trade slowed down, and the people watched nervously as their divine ruler's family tore itself apart. Egypt's stability, its economy, its faith, all depended on the outcome of those private wars. Some pharaohs managed to balance the storm. They understood the art of patience, rewarding loyalty, silencing dissent, and keeping enemies close enough to control. Others were less fortunate, undone by ambition and betrayal from their own blood. The scars of those struggles could last for generations, shaping dynasties long after the original rivals were gone. In these stories of jealousy and power, we see the human heart beneath the godly crown. The pharaohs may have ruled as divine beings, but within their families, they faced the same emotions that have haunted every household: envy, pride, fear, and love twisted into something dangerous. Their thrones were built not just on stone and gold, but on trust that could break at any moment. The succession battles of Egypt remind us that history's greatest empires were driven by human hands and human flaws. Behind every monument, every temple, and every name carved in stone, there were whispers, alliances, and betrayals. Stories of families who lived and fought like gods, but bled like everyone else. And perhaps that's why their stories still hold us today. Because beneath all the splendor, the pharaoh's greatest struggle was not with death, or gods, or time, but with their own blood. Pharaoh's obsession with death and tomb construction. In ancient Egypt, death wasn't seen as an end. It was a continuation, a doorway. And for the pharaohs, that doorway had to be built with the greatest care, for it was not simply their afterlife at stake, but their eternal identity. The living pharaoh ruled the land of men, but he also carried the weight of preparing for eternity. Every sunrise reminded him of his divine duty, and every sunset whispered of the long journey that awaited beyond the tomb. From the moment a king took the throne, the race toward immortality began. Tombs were not just resting places, they were entire worlds built in stone, reflections of the heavens, designed to ensure that the pharaoh's soul would live forever. To rule Egypt was to build eternity itself, and for that, the greatest minds, artists, and laborers of the age were summoned to transform rock and sand into something divine. Construction began almost immediately after coronation. Plans were whispered among architects and priests, designs inspired by sacred geometry, aligned with stars that never faded. Every angle, every passage, every symbol carved into the walls had meaning. The tomb was a cosmic map, a spiritual machine crafted to guide the king's soul safely through the perils of the afterlife. But behind the holiness lay something darker: obsession. The fear of death haunted even those who were called gods. For all their power, pharaohs could not escape the slow decay of time, the fragility of flesh, and so they poured everything, their wealth, their resources, their people's labor, into defying it. Imagine standing in the desert, watching as thousands of workers carve limestone blocks beneath a scorching sun. The air hums with the sound of chisels. Dust rises in golden waves. Overseers shout commands while priests chant prayers to keep misfortune away. It is a city in motion, a living organism devoted entirely to one man's eternal dream. The tombs grew larger, more elaborate, more secretive with each generation. From the majestic pyramids of Giza to the hidden chambers of the Valley of the Kings, each structure was a message to eternity. I was here. I mattered. I am divine. Inside, the decorations told stories not of conquest or rule, but of fear and faith. Walls bloomed with images of gods, monsters, and rivers of fire, scenes from the Book of the Dead etched in glowing pigments. Hieroglyphics whispered prayers that only the dead could hear. Every symbol was a spell, every color a protection. Even the direction a body faced held cosmic importance. The pharaoh's tomb wasn't just for him, it was a bridge between worlds. His journey through the underworld mirrored the daily rebirth of the sun god Ra. The idea was simple but profound. If the king could conquer death, then life itself, all of Egypt, would continue in harmony. His resurrection was the world's renewal. But this pursuit of immortality came with a price. Tombs consumed enormous wealth and manpower. Villages were built to house workers who spent their lives carving walls they would never see completed. Stone by stone, generation by generation, the living built the homes of the dead. Some workers left their own marks hidden in the shadows. Small carvings, jokes, or names etched behind slabs of limestone. It was their silent rebellion, proof that the builders of eternity also sought to be remembered. The Valley of the Kings became the new stage for these grand projects. Deep within the cliffs, hidden from view. The older pyramids, magnificent but vulnerable, had drawn too many tomb robbers. Now, secrecy became the new protection. Tunnels twisted like serpents into the earth, leading to burial chambers covered in gold leaf, perfumed oils, and treasures meant to accompany the pharaoh into the next life. The burial itself was a ritual of power and precision. When the king died, the world paused. Priests and embalmers began their sacred work, preserving the body so that the soul could recognize it. Organs were carefully removed and placed in canopic jars guarded by divine spirits. The body was wrapped in linen, layer upon layer, until it resembled the form of eternity itself. The final procession was both a spectacle and a prayer. The coffin, heavy with gold, was carried through the necropolis, surrounded by chanting priests and the scent of incense thick in the desert air. At the threshold of the tomb, rituals were performed to open the mouth of the mummy, to give it breath, to awaken the senses in the afterlife. Every movement had meaning, every sound echoed across centuries. Once sealed, the tomb became silent forever, or so they hoped. But silence in Egypt was rarely eternal. Tomb robbers came, driven by desperation or greed. Some were caught and punished in horrific ways. Others vanished into the night with fragments of a god's eternity in their hands. Even in death, the pharaoh's power inspired fear. Legends grew, of curses, spirits, and divine wrath waiting for those who dared to disturb the king's rest. These tales, whispered through generations, carried the echo of Egypt's greatest secret, that the boundary between life and death was thinner than we imagine. And yet, despite the fear, despite the cost, the obsession endured. Each new ruler tried to outdo the last, building tombs deeper, richer, and more elaborate. Some even began to see their tombs as living symbols of their rule, extending their power beyond the limits of their reign. But in that endless pursuit of eternity, something profoundly human emerges. The pharaohs, for all their divinity, feared what every human fears: the fading of their name, the silence after life. And so they carved their faces into stone, painted their triumphs on walls, and filled their tombs with whispers meant for gods. Their monuments still stand, silent, massive, unyielding. But what they truly built wasn't just architecture. It was memory. It was the belief that even in death, the story continues. Through their obsession with tombs and the afterlife, the pharaohs gave the world a vision of eternity that still endures. They turned fear into beauty, mortality into meaning, and the desert itself into a landscape of forever. And perhaps that's the greatest irony, that in trying to escape death, they ensured they would never be forgotten.
Forbidden magic and the pharaoh's sorcerers. In the heart of ancient Egypt,
Beneath the blazing sun and endless dunes, there existed a hidden world, one that most people never saw, and even fewer dared to speak of. It was a world of shadows, whispers, and power, where priests, magicians, and secret scribes sought to bend the forces of nature and eternity itself. For the pharaoh, who ruled as both king and god, magic was not superstition, it was law. It was the invisible thread that bound the living and the divine together. To understand Egypt is to understand that the supernatural was not a fantasy, it was reality. Every breath, every sunrise, every heartbeat was believed to be touched by unseen hands. The gods were everywhere, but so were darker forces, spirits, curses, and creatures that lingered just beyond the edge of light. The pharaoh stood at the center of this cosmic web, protected by spells, guarded by rituals, and served by men and women who practiced what we would now call magic. But this was not the kind of magic found in fairy tales. It was ritual, language, and knowledge, a science of the divine. Egyptian magicians, or Heka practitioners, believed that words themselves carried power. To name something was to control it. To speak a god's name correctly was to command its strength. To carve symbols in stone was to make them eternal. And so the royal court became a place not only of politics and religion, but of sorcery. Inside the palace walls there were rooms forbidden to most. There, priests and scribes worked by lamplight, copying sacred texts onto papyrus, reciting invocations that had been passed down for centuries. Their scrolls held the secrets of creation, formulas for protection, and spells for the afterlife. Some were meant to heal the sick or protect the pharaoh's body. Others were far darker, curses to destroy enemies, to blind spies, or to silence traitors. It was said that every pharaoh possessed a personal book of spells kept hidden within the palace. Among the most famous was the Book of Thoth, a legendary text said to hold the knowledge of the gods themselves. Whoever read it could command the heavens, speak with animals, and even raise the dead. But those who dared to misuse it were said to suffer the wrath of the gods, losing their sight, their sanity, or their souls. Magic was power, but it was also dangerous. And in a world where divine order was everything, stepping beyond one's place could mean disaster. Still, the line between priest and sorcerer was often blurred. The same man who performed holy rites for the gods might, in secret, mix potions, read omens, and summon unseen forces in service of the throne. In the royal court, the pharaoh's magicians were both revered and feared. They were called upon to interpret dreams, to predict floods, to identify enemies hidden among the nobility. Some were healers, using herbs and sacred chants to cure the pharaoh's ailments. Others were warriors of the unseen, casting protective circles before battles, calling upon gods like Isis, Thoth, and Sekhmet to grant victory or vengeance. And sometimes they failed. When the Nile refused to flood or illness struck the palace, eyes would turn toward the magicians. Whispers would grow. Had they angered the gods? Had someone used forbidden spells? To serve as the pharaoh's sorcerer was to walk a razor's edge between divine favor and deadly suspicion.
Stories from the temple archives speak of rituals performed under moonlight, priests tracing symbols in sand, chanting words so ancient that their meaning was half forgotten. Offerings of honey, wine, and incense were made to spirits who lived between worlds. It was believed that by channeling Heka, the fundamental force of creation, one could shape reality itself. But that power came with a price. Those who misused it or let arrogance replace devotion could be consumed by their own magic, their names erased, their souls condemned to wander forever. Magic surrounded the pharaoh from birth to death. At his coronation, spells were spoken to bind him to the gods. During life, amulets were worn to guard against evil. In death, his tomb was filled with words of power carved into the walls, each line a protection against chaos in the afterlife. The entire kingdom was a living spell designed to maintain Ma'at, the sacred balance between light and darkness. Some pharaohs were said to practice magic themselves. Akhenaten, who tried to reshape Egypt's religion, was rumored to have used secret invocations to call upon the sun god Aten. Ramses the Great surrounded himself with priests who claimed to control storms and plagues, and Thutmose III, the warrior king, was said to have kept scrolls that could summon visions of the future before every battle. Whether these tales were true or simply the mythology of power, one thing was certain: the belief in magic made it real. Real in its influence, its rituals, and its hold on the human imagination. Ordinary Egyptians also practiced their own humble forms of magic. A mother might whisper a spell over her child to keep away sickness. A farmer might bury charms in the soil to protect his crops. Magic was not limited to palaces. It was woven into the fabric of everyday life. But for the pharaoh, it was something more. It was a weapon, a shield, and sometimes a curse. The priests of Heka, the god of magic, taught that creation itself was an act of divine speech. The gods spoke, and the world became. To repeat those sacred sounds was to echo creation, to tap into the first power. This belief gave birth to an entire system of ritual, the crafting of amulets, the painting of sacred symbols, the chanting of hymns at dawn and dusk. Everything in Egypt, from medicine to architecture, carried a trace of this magical worldview. And yet, there was always fear. The higher the power, the greater the risk. Some sorcerers went too far, delving into forbidden texts, calling upon spirits of chaos, or seeking immortality outside the sanctioned rites. These men and women were hunted, their names erased, their families shamed. Egypt had no mercy for those who challenged the order of the gods. Still, the legends remained, of a priest who turned a wax crocodile into a living beast to punish a thief, of magicians who parted the waters of the Nile to reveal treasures hidden beneath, of secret chambers where the pharaoh's personal sorcerers worked spells that could heal or destroy. When we speak of Egyptian magic, we are not talking about tricks or illusions. We are talking about belief. Belief so powerful that it shaped how an entire civilization lived, ruled, and died. It was the heartbeat of Egypt, pulsing in temples, tombs, and whispered prayers. It gave order to chaos, meaning to fear, and hope to mortality. And for the pharaohs, who saw themselves as gods among men, it offered the most seductive promise of all, that through the right words, the right rituals, and the right faith, they might never truly die.
The palace of the pharaoh shimmered beneath the desert sun, a labyrinth of courtyards, columns, and whispered secrets. Beyond its grand halls, where officials bowed and servants hurried in silence, lay a part of the royal world that few ever saw. A place not marked on scrolls or carved into stone. A place of perfume, silk, and quiet power. It was called the Royal Harem. To outsiders, the harem was a mystery wrapped in gold. But within its walls, life pulsed with a rhythm of its own, soft, deliberate, and dangerous. This was no mere collection of wives and concubines. It was a living network of politics, ambition, and survival. The women who lived here knew that their smiles could shape the fate of Egypt, and that one careless word could end their lives. In the cool hours of morning, the harem awoke slowly. Light filtered through linen curtains, turning the air pale and golden. Servants moved like shadows, carrying trays of fruits and scented water. The women, adorned in delicate linen and jewels, began their rituals, bathing, dressing, painting eyes with kohl as black as night. They spoke softly, their laughter echoing faintly across marble floors. Yet behind every graceful movement lingered a question: who held the pharaoh's heart today? Love in the palace was a dangerous thing. Affection could grant a woman power beyond measure, or destroy her entirely. The great wife, the official queen, held rank and ceremony. But among the others, rivalry simmered like desert heat. Every look, every favor, every gift from the pharaoh could shift alliances overnight. To be noticed was to live. To be forgotten was to fade into dust. The harem was not a prison, though it was bound by invisible walls. Its women could not walk freely through the city, yet their influence reached farther than any market or temple. Through letters, servants, and whispers, they could shape decisions made in the throne room itself. Some advised the pharaoh in secret. Others passed words to priests or generals. A single suggestion, spoken in the quiet of night, might decide the fate of nations. Among the women were foreigners, princesses from Nubia, Syria, and beyond. They came as peace offerings, tokens of alliance, or symbols of surrender. They brought with them new languages, new customs, and sometimes new gods. These women often felt both honored and trapped, tied forever to a land that was not their own. Yet even they found ways to weave their stories into Egypt's grand tapestry. Some bore children who would one day rule. Others vanished into silence, their names erased by time. Children born in the harem grew up in an atmosphere of privilege and peril. They were pampered by servants, surrounded by music and art. But from their earliest days, they understood that the game of power began at birth. Every boy was a potential heir, every girl a future queen or political pawn. Mothers fought quietly for their children's futures, offering gifts to priests, forging secret alliances, and even spreading subtle rumors to weaken rivals. The harem had its own hierarchy. The great wife stood at the top, followed by favored consorts, attendants, and servants. But within this order, everything was fluid. A single night of affection could elevate a woman to prominence. A single mistake could reduce her to obscurity. And through it all, the air shimmered with tension, unspoken, but always felt. Evenings in the harem were a world apart.
As the sun fell behind the western cliffs, the palace softened into gold and shadow. Musicians tuned their harps, and dancers began slow, hypnotic movements to please the gods and sometimes the king himself. The air filled with the scent of lotus and myrrh. Wine flowed freely, and laughter echoed softly through the chambers. But beneath the laughter was strategy. Every story told, every glance exchanged, could alter the balance of power. Some nights the pharaoh would visit. His arrival was announced by a hush that spread like ripples across water. The chosen woman would be prepared, bathed, perfumed, dressed in linen so fine it seemed to glow. Her attendants whispered prayers to Hathor, goddess of love and beauty, hoping that charm and fortune would protect her. For a night in the pharaoh's presence could mean wealth, influence, or danger. And yet not all in the harem lived for affection. Some women sought wisdom instead of favor. They studied poetry, music, and healing. They became confidants to priests or even scribes in secret, leaving behind fragments of writing that scholars still puzzle over today. In their quiet way, they shaped culture, faith, and art, proof that even in seclusion, the voice of women could echo through eternity. But life here was fragile. Jealousy could be deadly, and betrayal often came from within. Servants spied for rival factions. Rumors could destroy reputations faster than poison. And though the pharaoh was the center of their world, he could be unpredictable, favoring one moment, forgetting the next. To survive, a woman needed grace, patience, and the wisdom to know when to speak and when to remain silent. In this delicate balance of beauty and danger, the women of the harem created a quiet power that history seldom records. They softened kings, influenced decrees, and safeguarded the future of dynasties. Their strength lay not in armies or crowns, but in whispers and smiles, in moments of intimacy that altered the course of nations. When night finally deepened and the music faded into silence, the harem would grow still. Oil lamps flickered low. The women lay on beds of linen, eyes open to the ceiling painted with stars. Some dreamed of love. Some dreamed of freedom. Others dreamed of their children wearing the double crown of Egypt. And somewhere in the distance, the Nile flowed quietly under the moonlight, its waters carrying their secrets to the eternal sands. The harem may have been hidden from the world, but it was here, behind its veils and silences, that much of Egypt's destiny was born.
The temples of eternity, how the pharaohs spoke to the gods. In the heart of ancient Egypt, where the desert met the river and the air shimmered with heat, rose the temples, colossal, silent, eternal. They were not built merely for worship. They were messages carved in stone, bridges between heaven and earth, between the pharaoh and the gods. Every wall, every column, every shadow held a story, a promise that the world would never fall into chaos as long as the gods were honored. To walk into one of these temples was to step into another reality. The sunlight outside was harsh and blinding, but within the temple, the air turned cool and dim. Columns loomed like trees in a sacred forest, their carvings whispering the names of gods older than memory. The scent of incense lingered everywhere, thick with meaning, a breath of devotion rising to the unseen. The sound of sandals on stone echoed softly, rhythmic, eternal. This was where the pharaoh came not as a ruler of men, but as a son of the gods.
His role was not only political, it was cosmic. He alone could speak directly to the divine, ensuring that Ma'at, the sacred balance of order, justice, and harmony, remained unbroken. Without Ma'at, the Nile would not flood, the crops would not grow, and the stars themselves might lose their path across the night sky. Every temple ritual was a performance of eternity. At dawn, priests washed and clothed the statues of the gods, just as servants dressed the pharaoh himself. They offered bread, wine, flowers, and music, not because the gods needed sustenance, but because devotion kept the universe alive. When the pharaoh entered the temple, surrounded by chants and the flicker of torches, he became the living link between mortal and divine. In that moment, he was not a man. He was Horus. He was Ra's chosen vessel. He was Egypt itself. The great temples of Karnak, Luxor, and Abu Simbel still stand today, their walls covered in scenes that shimmer with ancient power. Pharaohs are shown kneeling before gods, their hands offering gifts of gold and incense. Hieroglyphs spiral around them, words that blend prayer, history, and poetry. To read them is to hear the voice of a civilization that believed stone could speak to eternity. Every detail in these temples had meaning. The alignment of the gates with the rising sun, the carvings of lotus and papyrus symbolizing Upper and Lower Egypt, the sacred pools reflecting the sky, all were designed to mirror the cosmos. The architects were not merely builders, they were philosophers, mathematicians, and dreamers. They understood that architecture could be a form of prayer, that beauty itself was divine language. Inside the temples, light was sacred. As the sun rose higher, its rays would pierce through narrow corridors, illuminating the inner sanctuary where the statue of the god stood. This was the holiest moment, when the world of men met the world of the gods. For the priests and the pharaoh, that golden light was not just sunlight, it was life itself, the fire of creation touching the earth once more. The rituals were endless and precise, hours spent in prayer, chanting hymns in a language so old that even in their time, only the priests understood every word. Drums beat softly, and the air trembled with the rhythm of faith. Offerings of wine, oil, and bread were placed carefully before altars. Every motion, every syllable was deliberate, a conversation carried out across eternity. But behind the beauty of these rituals was a deeper truth. The pharaoh needed the temple as much as the temple needed him. Without these daily rites, his divine authority might weaken. The people's faith could waver. And so the temples were not just monuments to gods, they were monuments to kingship itself. Each offering, each festival, each inscription was a reminder the pharaoh ruled not by sword or fear, but by divine right. Festivals turned the cities into living prayers. During the Opet festival, the statue of Amun was carried from Karnak to Luxor in a grand procession. The Nile was filled with boats draped in gold and linen, priests chanting as drums echoed across the water. Citizens lined the riverbanks, singing, dancing, rejoicing in the renewal of divine energy. For those few days, heaven and earth seemed to touch, and all Egypt felt its pulse as one. In these moments, the line between God and man blurred completely. The pharaoh, radiant in his robes, would stand before the people, embodying both divinity and humanity. He was the bridge, the access, the point where eternity bent down to kiss the mortal world. And though he wore gold and power like a second skin, there was a weight in his eyes, the knowledge that to fail in his duty was to let the cosmos collapse. Beyond the rituals, the temples were also schools, libraries, and archives. Priests studied astronomy, medicine, and philosophy within their walls. They mapped the stars, recorded the floods of the Nile, and calculated time itself. In these hidden chambers, science and spirituality were not opposites. They were one and the same, two sides of the same divine truth. At night, when the crowds dispersed and torches flickered low, the temples transformed again. The silence was immense, almost alive. Wind moved through the corridors, whispering over carvings that glowed faintly under the moon. It was said that the gods themselves walked then, unseen but felt in the cool air and the soft trembling of the lamps. For the priests who stayed awake to tend the sacred flame, it was a moment of awe and fear. The world outside slept, but within these walls, eternity still breathed. The pharaoh's name carved deep in stone was his prayer for immortality. Every inscription was a promise that he would live forever, that his voice would not fade. And though the centuries have worn away his flesh and throne, the temples remain, vast, quiet, and filled with light that refuses to die. Even now, when travelers walk among the ruins, they can feel it, that strange ancient pulse, the echo of footsteps on stone, the scent of dust and incense, the stillness that feels almost sacred. It's as if time itself pauses, listening. The temples remind us that ancient Egypt was not just a civilization, it was a dream carved in stone, a dream that believed humans could touch the divine. And through every wall and every whisper of wind, that dream still speaks, softly, patiently, eternally.
The Pharaohs and the afterlife, building the path to eternity. In ancient Egypt, death was never an end. It was a passage, a journey through stars, shadows, and endless silence. The pharaohs did not fear it. They prepared for it all their lives. Because for them, death was not a fall into darkness, it was a return to the light. Every grain of sand along the Nile seemed to whisper this truth. The river that gave life to Egypt was also a mirror of eternity, rising, falling, renewing, again and again. The pharaoh watched it each year, the great flood spreading across the land, leaving behind fertile soil. And he knew, just as the Nile returned after its season of absence, so too would he rise after death. It was the rhythm of the universe, the endless breath of creation. To prepare for that return, the pharaohs built tombs that were not tombs at all, but entire worlds. Hidden deep in cliffs or buried beneath pyramids, they were designed as maps of the afterlife, guides for the soul's long voyage. Every passage, every chamber was a prayer in stone. The ceilings were painted with stars, the walls alive with stories, gods, demons, rivers of fire, and fields of eternal peace. Each image was a spell, each color a charm, meant to protect the king on his journey beyond. The journey after death was long and perilous. The pharaoh's soul, his ka, would awaken inside the dark tomb, still and silent as the air. The first breath of the afterlife was said to be heavy, filled with the scent of oils and resin, the faint echo of the last hymn sung by the priests. He would stand, radiant, wearing the crown of life once more, and begin his passage through the underworld. The Egyptians called it the Duat, the mysterious realm beneath the earth, filled with rivers, gates, and guardians. Here, time had no meaning. The sun itself traveled through this world each night, sailing on a golden boat, fighting the great serpent of chaos, Apophis. To follow that same path was the destiny of every pharaoh. If he succeeded, he would rise again with the dawn, reborn as Ra, Lord of the Sun, forever shining upon his people. But the Duat was not kind. It was a land of tests. The dead king had to face 42 judges, each asking him to declare his purity. He would say, "I have not stolen. I have not killed. I have not lied. I am pure." His heart, the seat of his soul, would then be weighed on a golden scale against the feather of Ma'at, goddess of truth and balance. If his heart was lighter than the feather, he would be granted eternal life. If heavier, it would be devoured by the monster Amit, half lion, half crocodile, half hippo, and his soul would vanish forever. That was the fear that haunted even the mightiest kings, the fear of being forgotten, not just in life, but in eternity. And so their tombs became their final voices. Their names were carved deep into stone, meant to be spoken by generations yet unborn, because to the Egyptians, a name was life itself. If it was erased, the soul was lost forever. In the Valley of the Kings, their tombs still whisper. Long, painted corridors stretch into darkness, glowing faintly with blues, reds, and golds that time could not erase. The stories on those walls are like dreams frozen in color. The pharaoh sailing the celestial river, the stars guiding him toward the horizon where dawn never dies. In these quiet chambers, it feels as though the air itself remembers. The workers who built those tombs, the artisans of Deir el-Medina, lived their entire lives for that purpose. They chiseled stone, mixed pigments, wrote spells and carved prayers, not for themselves, but for a king who would one day need them in another world. They believed that their work would help the pharaoh rise again, and that in his rising, the world would continue to exist. Their labor was devotion, their art, immortality. And when the pharaoh finally died, the land mourned as though the sun itself had gone dark. Priests moved in silent processions, carrying the golden coffin through the desert night. Torches flickered, their flames dancing against the cliffs, like stars come down to guide the dead. They sang hymns older than history, voices trembling in the cold air. Rise, O king, and journey eastward. Cross the river, take your throne among the stars. The burial was the beginning of the journey, not the end. Within the tomb, treasures filled every chamber. Food, wine, jewels, statues, even miniature servants to serve the king in the afterlife. All he needed for eternity was placed with care beside him. For to the Egyptians, death was simply life continued elsewhere. The afterlife was not an unknown terror, it was a home prepared in advance. And so the tombs were built with breathtaking precision, aligned with constellations, designed to channel the light of the sun and stars into the chambers below.
Some believed that when the sunlight touched the name of the pharaoh on the day of his death, his soul would awaken in the heavens. It was the ultimate union of architecture, faith, and astronomy, a bridge of light stretching from earth to eternity. Centuries passed, the sands shifted, empires fell, but the tombs remained, silent, hidden, patient. Even after robbers came, even after kings were forgotten, the spirit of those who built for eternity still lingers in the air, a kind of peace, a kind of waiting. And now, when you walk through the Valley of the Kings, the air feels heavy, not with fear, but with presence. The walls glow faintly under torchlight. The hieroglyphs shimmer as though they remember what they once meant. And if you stand there long enough, listening, you can almost hear it. The sound of chisels, the murmur of prayers, the heartbeat of a civilization that refused to die. Because the pharaohs did not believe in death. They believed in transformation, in becoming something greater, something eternal. Their monuments were not meant to defy time. They were meant to exist within it, forever part of the rhythm of sun and sand and sky. And maybe that's why, even now, thousands of years later, their names are still spoken, their tombs still stand, and their dreams of eternity still shine, like stars that refuse to fade.
The gods who walked among us, the divine faces of ancient Egypt.
The dark secrets of royal power, assassination, conspiracy, and forbidden knowledge in ancient Egypt. Beneath the shining gold of temples, beneath the laughter and music of royal courts, there existed a shadowed world that few dared to speak of. Power in ancient Egypt was not only divine, it was fragile, contested, and sometimes deadly. For every pharaoh who rose to greatness, there were whispers of betrayal, plots in hidden corridors, and secrets kept from even the most trusted advisors. The closer one walked to the throne, the darker the shadows became. A pharaoh's life was a constant balancing act. To be God on earth was to inspire awe, but to wield absolute authority was to invite envy, resentment, and dangerous ambition. In the grand halls of palaces, courtiers whispered, alliances shifted, and minor disputes could escalate into life-threatening conspiracies. Even a simple glance, a word misinterpreted, or a momentary hesitation could be twisted into a sign of treachery. Assassination, though rare, was not unheard of. The methods were subtle. Poison slipped into wine, sudden accidents arranged to look like fate, servants manipulated to act at the right moment. The tombs themselves held warnings of betrayal. Hieroglyphs sometimes recorded mysterious deaths of princes, ministers, or even pharaohs themselves, leaving historians centuries later to wonder about the hidden intrigues that shaped a dynasty. The threat often came from within. Family members, those closest by blood, were sometimes the greatest danger. Siblings, jealous consorts, or ambitious sons could challenge a ruler with cunning patience rather than open rebellion. A pharaoh might awaken one morning to find allies have quietly shifted loyalty, advisors plotting behind closed doors, and once loyal officials now ready to betray him for personal gain. Even a god on earth could not escape human ambition. The harem was a center not only of luxury, but also of subtle political warfare. Women were advisors, manipulators, and protectors of their children's future. Through whispered counsel and carefully timed actions, queens and concubines could shape the destiny of the kingdom, often in invisible ways to outsiders. Favor with the pharaoh could secure power, while neglect could spell ruin. In this delicate web, the line between devotion and intrigue was often impossible to discern. Priests, too, wielded tremendous influence. They controlled knowledge, rituals, and sacred spaces. Some sought to support the pharaoh, but others were political players, capable of swaying public opinion or interpreting omens to suit their ambitions. A favorable prophecy could elevate a minor prince. An ominous sign could undermine even the most secure ruler. The pharaoh's survival often depended as much on reading religious currents as on military skill. Forbidden knowledge played a hidden role. Scrolls contained spells, rituals, and instructions not meant for every eye. The Book of the Dead, for example, guided souls through the underworld, but certain chapters included powers that, in theory, could manipulate fate or protect against assassins. Courtiers who understood even fragments of this knowledge could become incredibly dangerous. Secrets were currency, and a misplaced word could tip the scales of life and death. Assassins were trained in silence, moving like shadows through palace corridors. Sometimes entire factions worked in concert, plotting over months or years. The meticulousness of such schemes required patience, cunning, and an almost ritualistic precision. Yet for every plot hatched, there was the ever-watchful pharaoh, trained from childhood to anticipate betrayal,
to read subtle signs, and to act decisively. Paranoia was not weakness, it was survival. Even military campaigns were laced with intrigue. Generals entrusted with armies could become threats if ambition outweighed loyalty. A single betrayal in battle could mean the loss of both crown and life. For pharaohs, every soldier, every envoy, every foreign diplomat was a potential ally or hidden enemy. Trust was a fragile commodity, constantly tested against ambition, fear, and desire. Despite the darkness, the pharaoh was expected to maintain absolute composure. Every public appearance was a performance of power. Every word a demonstration of wisdom. The gods watched, the people watched, and the conspirators watched as well. Even in private, vigilance was essential. Sleep was lighter, meals carefully guarded, letters carefully scrutinized. The line between safety and danger was thinner than the finest linen, and every moment carried consequence. Some pharaohs mastered the art of intrigue, using it to secure their rule. They might pretend ignorance, manipulate alliances, and reward loyalty strategically. Others, less skilled, fell victim to the very system they inherited. History is dotted with rulers who vanished mysteriously, assassinated, or forced into exile, leaving behind only whispers of what had occurred in the darkened corridors of the palace. The lessons of these intrigues were taught from youth. Children of the royal family were trained to observe, to anticipate, to discern loyalty from deception. Even games of strategy and board play were lessons in thinking several moves ahead. To survive the throne, one needed both the mind of a tactician and the presence of a god. Yet, for all the danger, there was a sense of ritual even in betrayal. Plots, schemes, and assassinations were rarely chaotic. They followed rules, codes, and traditions, a balance of fear and order. In this way, the darkness of palace life was intertwined with the divine, each action a reflection of cosmic balance, even when morality seemed absent. And so, in ancient Egypt, power was not merely the ability to command armies or collect tribute. It was a constant negotiation with shadows, whispers, and human desire. Even a pharaoh, crowned by the gods, walked a perilous path. Every day could be the day of triumph or the day of downfall. As we reflect on these secret worlds of intrigue, it becomes clear that Egyptian history is not just the story of monuments, pyramids, and gods. It is the story of human ambition, of trust betrayed, of knowledge hidden, and of lives lived in the tension between divinity and danger. The throne was not just a seat of power, it was a crucible in which kings were tested, refined, and sometimes destroyed. To understand the dark secrets of royal power is to understand the humanity behind the divine. Even the god-kings of Egypt were mortal, vulnerable to jealousy, conspiracy, and ambition. Yet in their struggle, in their vigilance, and in their mastery of intrigue, we glimpse the extraordinary complexity of a civilization that revered both the divine and the human, a civilization where history itself was written not only in stone, but in shadow. Pharaohs and the mystical arts, magic, alchemy, and the secret knowledge of the Nile. In ancient Egypt, magic was not an illusion or entertainment. It was the essence of existence itself. The world was alive with unseen forces, and the pharaohs, as both kings and gods, were trained to navigate, manipulate, and master them. Every river current, every sunrise, and every whisper of wind held a hidden energy. To be a ruler,
was not merely to govern humans, but to command the very fabric of the universe. From birth, royal children were taught that the line between reality and magic was permeable. They learned that words carried power, that symbols could alter fate, and that rituals could influence both life and death. Amulets, charms, and sacred inscriptions were not mere decoration. They were instruments of control, protection, and foresight. Even the simplest gesture could be a spell, a talismanic action that ensured divine favor or warded off misfortune. The pharaoh, above all, was the supreme practitioner of this mystical knowledge. He did not merely wear amulets or recite prayers, he embodied the principles of magic itself. Through sacred rites, offerings, and gestures, he harmonized the forces of chaos and order. Every decision, whether a military campaign, a treaty, or a building project, was infused with ritual significance, designed to align human action with cosmic balance. Alchemy, too, played a secret role in royal life. It was not the laboratory science of later centuries, but a sacred understanding of transformation and hidden potential. Gold, for example, was considered eternal, a substance of divine origin that could connect the mortal realm to the divine. Elixirs, perfumes, and oils were carefully prepared, imbued with protective properties, and used in daily ceremonies. Even food and drink were more than sustenance. They were offerings, carriers of mystical influence, and tools for maintaining harmony between humans and gods. The Nile itself was central to these arts. Its annual floods were not merely natural phenomena, they were divine events. Priests and pharaohs alike interpreted the river's behavior, understanding that its waters carried messages from the gods. Sacred rituals ensured that the river flowed predictably, crops flourished, and communities prospered. To control, honor, and work with the Nile was to wield power over life itself. Magic was also a protective force. Assassins, disease, and famine were constant threats, both mortal and spiritual. Pharaohs carried spells into battle, inscribed protective texts on armor, and surrounded themselves with amulets. Priests conducted ceremonies to repel evil spirits, invoke divine guardians, and strengthen the ruler's aura. Even the palace walls bore inscriptions designed to shield the king from unseen harm. The use of language itself was a mystical practice. Hieroglyphs were sacred symbols capable of influencing reality when carved, painted, or spoken correctly. A single word, written or spoken in ritual context, could bless crops, protect a child, or invoke the gods' intervention. Pharaohs and their scribes were masters of these linguistic powers, weaving them into governance, architecture, and daily life. To read or write without understanding this mystical dimension was to miss the essence of Egypt itself. Dreams were another conduit to the mystical. The pharaohs believed that during sleep, the spirit could travel, commune with gods, or gain insights into the future. Advisors would interpret dreams, priests would translate visions, and kings themselves kept meticulous records of nocturnal experiences. A simple image in a dream could become a decisive strategy, a warning, or a confirmation of divine will. Divination was intertwined with both politics and magic. Scrying, omens, and the observation of celestial patterns guided decisions of state. Every eclipse, comet, or unusual animal behavior could hold hidden meaning. The pharaoh, by virtue of divine favor and mystical training, was expected to interpret these signs correctly. Mistakes were more than political. They could be seen as disruptions of cosmic order. Even the pharaoh's personal life was governed by mystical principles. Marriages, children, and alliances were orchestrated with spiritual as well as political purpose. Rituals ensured that offspring were blessed, that unions strengthened divine harmony, and that dynasties continued to embody sacred order. Nothing in life was ordinary, because nothing in Egypt existed outside the web of magical forces that connected gods, humans, and nature. Sacred texts and scrolls were repositories of this knowledge. The Book of the Dead, the pyramid texts, and countless other manuscripts contained spells, instructions, and mystical wisdom. These were closely guarded secrets, often accessible only to priests and royalty. They were not merely guides to the afterlife. They were tools for navigating the living world, maintaining order, and exercising authority in ways that were invisible to ordinary citizens. Magic also permeated art and architecture. Temples were designed not only to honor gods, but to channel divine energy. Statues were positioned according to celestial principles. Colors, proportions, and materials were chosen to enhance sacred potency. Every construction, from the smallest shrine to the grandest pyramid, was both practical and mystical, blending human skill with spiritual purpose. Yet the most intimate form of mystical practice was personal meditation and contemplation. Pharaohs would spend hours alone reflecting on their role as intermediaries between the divine and mortal worlds. They visualized cosmic balance, recited sacred texts, and attuned themselves to the rhythms of the Nile, the sun, and the stars. In these moments, the king was not just a ruler, he was a conduit, a living embodiment of the forces that shaped life itself. Understanding the mystical arts of ancient Egypt reveals a civilization that lived in constant dialogue with the unseen. The pharaohs, crowned with divine authority, wielded not only armies and laws, but also the subtle, profound forces of magic and alchemy. Their power was both visible and hidden, tangible and spiritual. They ruled not just the people, but the very laws of the universe, bridging the mortal and divine in every breath, gesture, and decision. In this world, nothing was ordinary. A sunrise was a ritual, a river a message, a word a spell. And the pharaoh, walking through it all, moved with purpose, authority, and the silent awareness that every moment was infused with power beyond comprehension. Even today, when we gaze upon the pyramids, the temples, or the gilded artifacts, we catch a faint echo of that mystical knowledge, the whispered power of a civilization that lived not only in the material world, but also in the intricate currents of magic, ritual, and divine insight. It is a reminder that in ancient Egypt, to be a king was to master forces both seen and unseen, to carry the weight of gods, and to navigate a world where every gesture could shape destiny itself.
The pharaoh's obsession with immortality, tombs, mummification, and eternal legacy. In ancient Egypt, life and death were not separate, distant realms. For a pharaoh, to rule was not only to govern the living, but to secure a presence that would endure for eternity. From the moment of birth, the king's path was intertwined with death, not as an ending, but as a continuation, a transformation into a god who would watch over the land, guide the people, and maintain cosmic balance forever. Immortality was not a dream.
It was a meticulous, carefully orchestrated goal, pursued with the same precision and obsession that marked every aspect of royal life. The construction of a tomb was one of the most sacred responsibilities of a pharaoh. It was not merely a resting place, but a vessel for eternal existence. Pyramids, rock-cut tombs, and sprawling necropolises were built with exacting care, designed according to astronomical alignments and sacred geometry. Every wall, every chamber, and every corridor was inscribed with texts, spells, and prayers intended to guide the pharaoh safely through the underworld. The tomb was a palace for eternity, reflecting both worldly grandeur and divine preparation. Mummification was equally precise and mystical. The body was treated as a sacred vessel, a container for the soul that must survive beyond mortal existence. Organs were preserved, fluids replaced with resins, and the body wrapped in layers of linen imbued with prayers and protective charms. This was not merely preservation, it was a ritual of transformation. Every incision, every gesture, every aromatic oil applied to the skin was performed with spiritual significance, ensuring that the king's essence remained intact, ready to ascend to a divine existence. The burial chamber itself was a canvas of immortality. Walls were painted with vivid scenes depicting journeys through the afterlife, encounters with gods, and the eternal rewards awaiting the pharaoh. Hieroglyphic inscriptions outline spells to repel demons, illuminate the path, and maintain the king's power beyond death. Treasure, jewelry, ceremonial objects, and even food were placed within the tomb, not for earthly enjoyment, but as tools for sustaining divine life. Every item reflected the belief that physical and spiritual worlds were inseparable, that what was provided for the body would nourish the soul. This obsession with eternal life extended beyond the tomb into the living world. Every ritual, ceremony, and act of governance carried symbolic weight, reinforcing the king's immortal status. Coronation, festivals, and offerings were not simply expressions of authority, they were affirmations that the king existed in both time and eternity. Monuments erected during life were designed to last forever, ensuring that memory, worship, and divine presence continued uninterrupted. Pharaohs also relied on priests to maintain spiritual continuity. Priests were guardians of sacred knowledge, masters of spells, and intermediaries between the mortal and divine realms. They conducted daily rites, recited protective chants, and supervised rituals that sustained the king's essence. Without their care, the carefully constructed bridge between life and immortality could falter. The pharaoh's eternal existence depended on both human diligence and divine favor, a delicate balance maintained through centuries of devotion. Interestingly, even pharaohs of the same dynasty competed in their pursuit of immortality. Tombs grew larger, more elaborate, and more intricately decorated with each generation. The desire to outshine predecessors was not mere vanity, it was a demonstration of cosmic favor and eternal significance. Monuments, statues, and inscriptions became instruments of competition, a race to secure legacy in a world where life itself was fleeting. Mummification, tomb construction, and ritual were also intimately tied to mythology. The pharaoh's death mirrored the journey of Osiris, god of the afterlife, whose resurrection represented triumph over chaos. By aligning themselves with Osiris, kings ensured that they would not simply vanish, but would ascend to a divine role, continuing to guide and protect Egypt. Magic, ritual, and architecture merged seamlessly, creating a path from mortality to eternal godhood. Even the common people participated in subtle ways in the pharaoh's quest for immortality. Public rituals, offerings and prayers reinforced the divine essence of the ruler. Workers, artisans, and scribes understood that their labor contributed to a larger cosmic order. Every brick laid, every inscription carved, every hymn sung became part of the pharaoh's eternal life, extending influence far beyond the physical realm. Yet the obsession with immortality also carried psychological weight. For a king who lived under constant scrutiny, the knowledge that every act would echo into eternity was both empowering and exhausting. Perfection became mandatory, not optional. Errors in judgment, ritual mistakes, or neglect of sacred duties could threaten the pharaoh's eternal legacy. This relentless pressure shaped not only the body and soul, but also the mind, creating rulers who were both visionary and haunted, consumed by the desire to leave a mark that would endure forever. The treasures placed in tombs were not merely wealth, they were symbols of cosmic authority. Gold, lapis lazuli, and rare stones were believed to carry divine properties, aiding the king in his eternal journey. Weapons, chariots, and ceremonial objects ensured that the pharaoh could maintain power even in death. The afterlife was imagined as a mirror of earthly life, enhanced by divine favor, and every detail was carefully considered to guarantee success beyond mortality. Pharaohs also commissioned texts like the pyramid texts, coffin texts, and later the Book of the Dead to guide them through the underworld. These documents contained precise instructions, magical spells, and divine counsel, ensuring that the king could navigate challenges, repel demons, and emerge triumphant. Every phrase, illustration, and symbol was a tool to secure immortality, a testament to the extraordinary intersection of human skill, spiritual insight, and divine aspiration. Understanding this obsession with eternal life allows us to see ancient Egypt in a new light. The pharaoh's pursuit of immortality was not idle fantasy. It was the foundation of their power, the justification for their authority, and the ultimate expression of their divine identity. Life and death were not opposites. They were threads in a single tapestry, woven with care, ritual, and unyielding precision. By exploring tombs, mummification, and eternal legacy, we witness the extraordinary lengths to which rulers went to secure their immortality. Every monument, ritual, and artifact becomes a window into the mind of a king who viewed death not as an end, but as a transition into a higher, eternal role. In ancient Egypt, immortality was both a promise and a responsibility, a sacred, all-consuming pursuit that defined the lives, deaths, and legacies of those who dared to claim divinity on earth.
When the gods fell silent, the last dawn of ancient Egypt. The sun still rose over the Nile. Its golden light touched the temples, glimmered across statues of forgotten gods, and kissed the stones of tombs that had once guarded kings. But the songs that once filled those sacred halls had faded. The prayers had grown faint, and Egypt, the eternal kingdom, was beginning to dream its final dream. For thousands of years, the pharaohs had ruled as living gods. Their word had shaped nations. Their tombs had defied time. But no empire, no matter how divine, can escape the slow erosion of time. The end did not come with thunder or fire. It came quietly, like the slow receding of a tide, a fading of faith, of power, of memory. Foreign armies came first. Persians, Greeks, and later Romans marched through the sands, drawn by gold, grain, and glory. They brought with them new gods, new languages, new ways of seeing the world.
Egypt's temples still stood, its rituals continued, but the old magic no longer ruled unchallenged. Even the priests could feel it. The sacred statues no longer spoke. The oracles whispered less and less, and in the stillness of the desert, something ancient began to die. Yet even in decline, Egypt was never truly silent. Its beauty was impossible to erase. The Nile still flowed, bringing life to the land. The pyramids still stood, defying both wind and time. And beneath the shifting sands, thousands of artisans, priests, and dreamers still left behind fragments of eternity, painted tombs, golden masks, and walls covered with prayers that no conqueror could destroy. In the great city of Alexandria, scholars gathered in the world's most magnificent library. They studied the stars, measured the earth, and wrote about the mysteries of gods and men. For a brief moment, the old wisdom of Egypt merged with the new reason of Greece. Science and spirit danced together, just as they had in the earliest temples of Ra. But even that brilliance would burn too brightly to last. The library fell to fire, and with it countless scrolls that held the voices of the ancients turned to smoke. In the temples of Isis and Osiris, the final priests continued their sacred rites. They lit candles before statues whose faces had been worn smooth by centuries of worship. Their chants echoed faintly through empty corridors. Each ritual felt like a farewell. They knew that the world was changing, that the gods they served were fading into myth. Still, they whispered the old prayers, not for power, but for remembrance. For in every heart, even the divine longs not to be forgotten. The last native pharaohs struggled to hold on. Some tried to restore the old faith. Others sought alliances with foreign powers. But the desert wind carried change. And soon Cleopatra, the last to wear the crown, would stand alone at the edge of history. Her beauty, her intellect, and her tragic love would captivate the world for centuries to come. Yet behind her legend lay something far older, the echo of a civilization that had already begun to fade long before her birth. When Cleopatra's city fell and Rome claimed Egypt, the age of pharaohs ended. The temples were abandoned, their gods replaced by new ones. The language of hieroglyphs was forgotten, and the meaning of sacred symbols vanished into silence. For the first time in 5,000 years, no living person could read the words carved on the walls of the pyramids. The gods who had once ruled the heavens became stories told by travelers, half remembered, half believed. Centuries passed. Sand buried cities. Desert winds erased footprints. Egypt slept, dreaming beneath its own monuments, waiting for someone to remember. And then one day the silence broke. In 1799, a black stone was unearthed near a small town called Rosetta. On its surface were inscriptions in 3 languages, Greek, Demotic, and the sacred hieroglyphs of the ancient kings. It became the key to unlocking a lost world. When the stone was finally deciphered after 2,000 years of silence, the voices of Egypt spoke again. Whispers from tomb walls, hymns to the gods, and the names of forgotten rulers all came back to life. The gods had not died, they had been waiting. Today we walk among their ruins. We stare at the pyramids and wonder how they were built. We trace the faded colors of wall paintings and imagine the hands that created them. We look at mummies and feel for a fleeting moment the closeness of immortality. In every museum and every desert breeze, Egypt still breathes. Its people may be gone, its temples broken, but its soul endures, quiet, eternal, and unbroken. The story of ancient Egypt is not merely the story of kings and gods. It is the story of human desire, the longing to be remembered, to leave something behind that time cannot destroy. Every pharaoh, every artisan, every scribe shared the same fragile hope that death could be defeated by memory. And perhaps in that hope they succeeded, because even now, thousands of years later, we still speak their names. We still marvel at their creations. We still listen to the silence of the desert and feel that somewhere beneath the sands, the old gods are still watching. So as the moon rises over the Nile and the stars shimmer over the Valley of the Kings, the story closes, not with an ending, but with a whisper. The whisper of a civilization that refused to vanish. The whisper of a people who believed that memory was stronger than death. And maybe they were right. Because as long as we remember, Egypt will never truly sleep. Its gods, its kings, and its dream of eternity will live on in every heart that still listens to the desert and hears the echo of immortality.